Good morning, everybody. We study this morning the Torah portion of Shelach, and I'm studying from the book Selections from the Kutei Sichot, the second Rebbe's talk. Just an overview. God gives Moshe the commandment to send spies to scout the Holy Land. They are choosing, the 12 are chosen, and Levi tribe wasn't part of it, but Yosef, Ephraim, and Menashe are two tribes. It's a total of 12. They come back immediately, 40 days later, and they say it's very bad, dangerous place. They're prepared. It's not a place for people to enjoy life, and we're not going to go. And they bring fruits from the Holy Land. They bought a cluster of grapes. They bought a pomegranate and a fig. Two men dissented, Yehoshua ben Nun and Caleb ben Yefuneh. They disagree in a disagreement with the majority. The Jewish people decides they want to go back to Egypt. God is very angry. He wants to destroy them. Moshe is begging forgiveness. God atones on the condition that anyone who is under 60 should not, male, should not enter the Holy Land. So every year, a bunch of men would die. The spies return on the 9th of Av, and God says, you cried for no reason. This day would be a source of pain and suffering forever. As we know throughout history, there have been many, many atrocities, pogroms. The Spanish Inquisition began. They marched out of Spain on the 9th of Av. I believe the First World War began on 9th of Av, and even the Second World War started around that time. That's the most important part. Then we read about the libations, different types of sacrifices, offerings to God, etc. This is a loaded portion, Shelach. Shelach means sent. Just in general, the rabbi is going to address several questions. I'm going to give you an introduction so it's easy to read it through. The first is, it tells Moshe, Shlach lecha, you decide to send. And as later Moshe says that it was the decision he and the people made, not God. In other words, God says to him, it's not my idea. Second, what kind of a behavior is it to do something without God's command? Not just God approved, but only after they requested. Usually it's not the case. Second is, at the time they were appointed, they were the leaders. They were very holy men. And what happened? That they are going exactly the opposite. Number three, what was their sin? After all, they were told to report their experience and what they've seen. We don't find anywhere that they lied. They didn't lie. So what is wrong with them that they are in such grave punishment? They receive a very grave punishment. And the Jewish people are punished to wander for 40 years in the desert and never enter the Holy Land. And this is going to be the topic of our discussion, and that will be able to apply the message to our day-to-day life. Yes.
But the fact that they decided to send spies to the land that God promised.
Yes.
Isn't that like questioning
God?
Yeah.
That's the point I'm making. God did not ask for it,
Right.
and you are adding to it. By sending spies, they are pointing out to the fact that they are unsure whether God can conquer the land or not. Right?
Yeah, okay.
So my answer, to be specific to your question, is that later on we find that Joshua had sent 2 spies. In the Haftarah, we read about it. And we read in the Torah about Yazer. There are a few towns that they did send spies prior. In other words, God wants to help us and guarantee success, but he wants us to do whatever it is that required naturally, except very unusual times. Conquering Jericho, God says, circle around the wall 7 days, 7 times. The walls will cave in. Egypt, God says, you have nothing to worry. You will leave, they will let you out. The ocean will split and kill them. Other than that, they needed to do whatever it takes. So they needed to be trained. They needed to use weapons. They needed to protect themselves, even though God promised.
They may have,
The question is, how come they came up with this idea, asking God, and God says, if that's what you want, you go. Meaning that God was very uncomfortable. Later on, Moshe says that God was not comfortable with the idea. As we know, the outcome was very devastating. Yes.
they may have spoken, maybe spoke somewhat positive tone about Israel at the time, but they failed, they were blind to the idea that God was helping them all along. People dying, so they shouldn't discover them. People avoiding them, you're dying.
Very good opinion, very good point. But the question that we you did not address is, what was their sin? That's what they saw. They saw a lot of burials. They saw many hospitals that they are very busy. The hospitals are busy. God did it as a blessing, so they should be busy taking care of the sick and the people who are dead. So they shouldn't be bothered to suspect that someone is scouring the land. But they didn't lie. They didn't lie. Even if they did Lashon Hara, which that the punishment was the tongue was stuck out. But for Lashon Hara, you don't get such a harsh punishment. It doesn't say that someone should be executed for speaking Lashon Hara. We are blaming them for in such a, God wants to wipe out, he regrets having the Jewish people, God forbid. What was that? Where did it come from? And that's the idea the rabbi is going to address.
Questioning the promise?
What?
If you're questioning the promise. Because if God gives you a promise.
No, it says, Moshe, I'll start from you, a new nation, and fulfill all my promises with you. You are a seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Right.
Moshe is the one who stand up to God and says, no, the other nations will say you do it because you cannot conquer those 31 kings. Israel was divided into sub-countries. There were 31 different countries, regions. And Moshe says to God, they will say that you can conquer one king, can fight 1, 2 kings, but 31 kings, too much for you. So God says, okay, I accept that, but they should not enter the Holy Land. So there was, it was a very harsh behavior. The punishment was very harsh. Number 1, interpreting the phrase, at your discretion, send out men. Our sages comment that the words Shlach Lecha implies based on your judgment. That is, God left the decision whether to send spies to Moshe's choice, telling him, I am not commending you. God explicitly told Moshe, it's according to your judgment to exclude my wish, to exclude my requests. It is up to you only by yourself without my involvement. Clarification is necessary. Moshe was God's faithful servant. Clearly then, Moshe's decision to send spies accorded with that of his master God. As the Torah affirms, Moshe sent them according to the words of God. That is immediately after, Vayishlach otam Moshe al pi Hashem, according to the words of God. So it's a self-contradictory. According to the words of God, that is the divine consent. Thus, sending the spies in and of itself was a good and desirable act. So why is this that there is some agitation here? On one hand, God says it's your choice, you do it on your own. but then he sent them out and he says that's God's, according to God's command. And we know Moshe never deviated from God's words. In other words, everything he did is in accordance with God. In that vein, Ramban Nachmanides explains that the ordinary manner in which one conquers a land is first to send spies to investigate what is the best and easiest manner to accomplish that objective. Therefore, since one should not rely on miracles, and it was necessary to prepare for war in an ordinary manner, Moshe agreed to the people's request to send spies. Nachmanides says that the request was just as you prepare for war. You prepare for war to pray to God, you prepare for war for training, you prepare for war making sure you have enough ammunition. Part of war is to plan before by knowing where are the fortresses, how to conquer, what type of people, how big the army, etc. And therefore, they needed to require to build a map to be able to prepare. This raises a question, says the Rabbi. Why did God leave the matter entirely to Moshe's discretion and not initially deliver such a command himself? If Nachmanides points out that this was the ordinary way that we need to do naturally, normally we have to do our efforts, and then God comes and helps. So God should have commanded him. Why does he leave it to his discretion? Another point requires clarification. Rashi states that the spies were worthy individuals at the time Moshe sent them. How could it be otherwise? If Moshe chose them, not only were they worthy, but they were the most suited for this particular mission. If so, how is it possible that they underwent such a drastic change from one extreme to the other? Not only did they not carry out the mission as they were supposed to, they brought about a tragedy whose effects would continue to be felt for ensuing generations of the Jewish people. Do you understand the question? In other words, such a polar opposite. He chose the choices, and they derailed the Jewish people for generations to come. It wasn't just a one act. How is it possible? So that's a second question. The above issues can be clarified by explaining that as a whole, the mission on which the spies were sent had two goals. The Rebbe said, let's find out what was the mission. Why were they sent to scout, to spy? A, to discover particular points of information relevant to the conquest of the land. As it is written, you shall see the people who inhabit it. Are they strong? Are they few? Do they dwell in open encampments or in fortified cities? So the first mission is just information only. How many people? How many units in the army? What kind of ammunition they use? How's the land? Is it swamps? Is it dry land? Start preparing to put together for the defense ministry to plan ahead a nice fight. B, but there is another one, to discover particulars regarding the land itself. As it is written, is it good? Is it abundant? He gave them another, Uritem et haaretz mahi. Look at the land. Atova hi imra'a. Is it a good or not? Ayesh ba'etz imaim. Are there plant trees, fruit-bearing trees or not? And he says to them, in other words, there was a second goal. The second goal was, I'm reading, so crucial to their mission that Moshe commanded them, be courageous, v'itchazaktem, be strong, be courageous, and take from the fruit of the land. Bring some fruit back with you. Although taking this fruit would endanger them because it could expose them as spies. Nevertheless, Moshe instructed them to act courageously and strive to bring back samples of the land's produce. In other words, he says that the second goal is not just a bypass. It is as equal, if not more, because it says to them, "Ve'itchazaktem ulkachtem mipri haaretz." Strengthen, be courageous, and bring with you some fruits as samples of the type of land. Are the tomatoes tasty? Are the tomatoes ripened? What kind of guavas? What kind of oranges? Everything that the land grows, bring some samples. So again, there are two missions. One is to find information how to conquer the land. The second is to discover the land itself. What's the difference between the two? The first one, they have to bring in diaries or maps or diagrams. The second one, they have to bring samples. He instructs them specifically, bring samples to show the people. This is problematic, says the Rebbe. God has already told the Jewish people that Eretz Israel, that the Holy Land, is a good and prosperous land. What kind of, you need to assure them? It's already been promised. A land flowing with milk and honey. Since Jews are inherently believers, the descendants of believers, certainly they trusted God's word. Moreover, in this instance, faith and trust were not necessary. Surely, having dwelled in Egypt, not far from Eretz Israel, from the Holy Land, the Jews were aware of the type of land it was, what type of land it was. Even so, this knowledge and trust is not comparable to actually seeing the produce of the land, bringing back the food and giving the Jews the opportunity to actually see the land's goodness would call forth great joy and motivate them to gladly ascend to Eretz Israel. For, as our sages state, hearing is not comparable to actually seeing. Nevertheless, was this purpose necessary enough to endanger the lives of the spies? The Rebbe says the following. They knew about the nature of that land. Egypt is not far. They knew all about it. And in addition, God says to them, the land is blessed because it flows with honey and milk. So they knew it, there is abundance of good there. However, you can say to me, you can't compare hearing to seeing. When you see the fruits, you said, from the Holy Land, oh, that's great. Now we know what we're going for, what we're going to receive. We understand that, makes sense. The problem is, Moshe says to them, "Ve'itchazaktem," be courageous. In other words, they're putting their life in danger. Is it worth it? Will it make such an impact? Otherwise, they wouldn't believe. Otherwise, they wouldn't want to enter. Says the Rebbe, to offer an explanation that helps clarify the above matters. The foundation of the observance of the Torah is complete and utter acceptance of God's will, as reflected in the Jews' promise, Na'aseh v'nishma. Says the Rebbe, let's go to the fundamentals. The foundation of our relationship with God is first Na'aseh, we will do, v'nishma, and then we'll hear and understand why. So the first and foremost is we obey God just like our master command the slave, the servant. We will do and we will listen. The promise we will do precedes we will listen, implying an unreserved commitment to do whatever God commands. So that's the first point. Now, Na'aseh v'nishma, meaning we will do, it doesn't matter what you tell us, it doesn't matter why, we will do because you are the master. However, says the Rebbe, we will listen, implying, nevertheless, we will do alone is not sufficient. They didn't say Na'aseh. They added v'nishma. Na'aseh is not enough. We will listen, nishma must follow. As suggested by the verse, speak because your servant is listening. Shomea, nishma can also be interpreted as meaning we will understand. Implied is that our commitment to God must include not only unreserved alliance we will do, but also an effort to understand. We will listen. So in other words, Rabbi says, when you have when we established our relationship with God, it came out in two parts. Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do, unreserved, without questioning, no exceptions. However, they added v'nishma. Na'aseh alone is not enough. You need to search for the reason. If you have the reason, it establishes a much deeper relationship. Similar concept applies with regards to the Jews entering into the Eretz Israel, says Rabbi. God promised them that it was a good and prosperous land. However, God also desired that the Jews see and appreciate the good of Eretz Israel according to their own understanding. God didn't want them going to Israel only Naaseh because he said so. He wanted them to do it v'nishma, to understand how beneficial it is for them, how pleasurable, how good it is. And therefore, Moshe instructed the spies to bring back some of the fruit of the land. He intended that after seeing the fruit, the Jews' desire to enter Eretz Israel would not only be motivated by God's command and their commitment to carry out his will, Naaseh, but would also come from their own perception, Nishma, i.e., that is, they would appreciate that one should desire to enter Eretz Israel because it is the true, good, and prosperous land. In other words, that's why Moshe is saying to them to be courageous and endanger their life to bring the fruits. So when the people back home, back in the desert see the kind of fruits, and they'd say, oh, that's why we want to go there. We are motivated now by our own will, not just because we need to fulfill God's commandments. So in like Naaseh v'nishma, you have doing without questioning, nishma, understanding. The going to the Eretz Israel is because God said so. All along it says, I'm taking you out of Egypt to our land flowing with milk and honey. But nishma is when the spies bring back the fruit and they see how beneficial it is. Therefore, the same motive applies regarding the first goal of their mission, to discover the best way to conquer Eretz Israel. The intent was that they should perceive with their own mind that we can surely overcome it. That explains the first part. Why is God sending more spies? Why God agreed to send spies? So that the level of connecting to the Holy Land and fighting should be coming from their own mindset. In other words, not because God said so and God will perform a miracle. We have to prepare. We have to train. We have to make sure we know from which part is best to cross into. Says the Rebbe, for that very reason, so now we understand why there were two parts and why they have to endanger their life to bring the fruits, because that solves the problem. Why? It's the reason is we want them to want it on their own will without just because God said so. For the very reason, says the Rebbe, God did not command the spies to be sent. Instead, he told Moshe that it depended on his judgment. God says to him, Shlach lecha. It's based on your judgment. Why? Since the spies were sent so that the Jews would appreciate the positive value of entering Eretz Israel according to their own understanding, that is, following the motive of Nishma, it was necessary that the decision to send the spies come from Moshe's judgment itself. They should be sent because this is what logic called for, not only because of a divine command, that is following only the motive of Naaseh. If God would command them, then they do it. It's part of Naaseh. The idea of Nishma, their own mindset would be connected to it, and they will be motivated with common sense. It's only when they come up with the idea. Therefore, God says to him, Shlach lecha, according to your judgment. If that's what you feel is right, I want you to do it.
Why do you have to say that?
So it sounds to me like Moshe's at fault, not the spies.
Later on, God says to him, it's your decision, and that's why I'm faulting you. But we'll see soon. Yes?
No.
What's the question?
Sorry.
We will see. Actually, that's bad, but we'll see. On this basis, we can. So now we solved the second problem. It seemed to be a contradiction. God says to him, Shlach lecha, according to your own judgment.
Mhm.
And then it says, Al pi Hashem, based on God's approval.
Why would he make the suggestion?
Just a minute. Now we solved that the only way you can send spies, the idea of a spy is to be able to naturally put all the efforts. Therefore, it cannot come as a command from God, because if it's a command of God, then the idea of a nishma, that their common sense will be willing to conquer and be willing to fight and understand that they can reach that point of conquering, is not going to be there. Therefore, God says, no, it's according to you. So Moshe, the faithful shepherd, have never done something against God's will. Here, either He didn't do anything against God's will. It was the way God wanted it, that it should come from the bottom up. It should come from the people. And therefore Moshe had to. We still have the question, how come they changed in such opposite way? Holy men become the most that causing for cry for generations.
Good question, God. He knew it was coming, he knew the future, he knew what was gonna happen. She have said, it's gonna be tragic, don't do it.
Very good point. The same question can be asked about everything. God wanted the universe so that we have a choice, and God knows the choice we're making, but still he wants us to make the choice.
Why say Shelach at all?
Huh?
Why say Shelach at all? Why bring this whole thing up if it's gonna be left up to Moshe to make a
Because,
choice?
just a minute, I just want to address something else. This is a question that can only be answered through Kabbalah. As the Rebbe will point out, this event wasn't something that happened 3,376 years ago. It's an event that can help us live our day-to-day life. We'll find out in a moment. And other than Kabbalah, there is no way to solve this problem, to answer this question in the most beautiful way. There is no other way.
And again, you think to yourself, why should all these generations, but then they suffered already because they died out.
Right.
They were punished. Why should we be punished again?
Why should we? Except the only way to explain it is we are the extension of their souls to repair what they have started, the mess that they created.
Why say Shelach at all?
What's the question? So again, the Rebbe just explained there is Naaseh and
I
Nishma.
understand that.
You want to
Why-
skip Nishma? The
No,
Jewish
I'm gonna
people
skip
said
it.
both.
Why say it all? Why say it at all? If it's up to Moshe to make a decision, why even bring it up? Let him make
So
a
I'm
decision.
here to tell you
Yeah.
that when the Jewish people accepted God's yoke,
Yeah.
unconditionally, they added Nishma,
I
meaning
understand.
it's a necessary component for which without it's impossible to have a relationship to God. Therefore, every command that God gives us, especially the important ones, they must be accompanied with both. As we'll discover soon, there is another component, the fact that they disobey God, they ended up messing up. But before, you must have both.
My question's much more basic than that. I understand the Naaseh and Ishma. Why say Shelach at all? Not Shelach Lecha. I understand the Lecha. Why say Shelach at all? Why even bring it up? If it's up to Moshe to make a decision.
So Ali, let me try and explain it again. It's the same explanation. Without Shlach,
Yeah.
without sending spies,
No, you can send spies. It's Moshe's choice.
just a minute. Without sending spies, they are missing the Nishma. They are going to conquer it only because God said so, without their own common sense interfering. And therefore, there has to be their involvement in the process. How do you do that involvement? Part of the involvement is to send out to spies to learn how the best way. I don't understand. So
I understand completely why Moshe would send spies. I'm saying, why did God even bring it up?
Moshe is asking God. I don't understand.
Shelach Lecha.
Moshe turned to God. Later on in Devarim, Moshe's retell the story, and he says, I turned to God and I said, the people are asking me to send spies. And God said to me, that's the request, let them do it. Okay?
Okay. So Devarim answers the question.
Now the Rebbe wants to address the last question, and today, God willing, we'll learn as Harry's asking, God knows everything. He could have skipped the whole scenario, but that's part of the process. It's way too simple. On this basis, we can also understand how it was possible for the spies chosen by Moshe, who initially were worthy to make such an, just a minute. Okay. On this basis, we can also understand how it was possible for the spies chosen by Moshe, who initially were worthy, holy people, to make such a severe mistake to the extent that they asserted we cannot assent. What happened here? Where did we go wrong? Says the Rebbe, since the mission on which they were sent involved the dimension of Nishma, the whole idea is it shouldn't come as a command, but it should come from the bottom, from the people, so that their mindset should be also involved. That is, clarifying the manner in which the Jewish people would enter Eretz Israel according to human understanding. There was a possibility for them to err in their logic and reckoning. Now, once you put it in the human brain, that machine, you're not going to get the perfect results. And there can be a turning point to go the opposite direction.
The good news is motivation, the bad news is they might make a mistake.
That's a chance. You're taking a chance.
That's the good news and bad news.
After all, everything the spies said, by the way, there is, I don't want to, you know what, I don't want to take the time because I want to finish today, but all I'm going to say, and I don't want to open up a can of worms, there's a whole debate, how do we deal with the modern technology that can destroy lives? Internet, smartphone. There is, when I grew up, television was shekets, was the worst, was worse than pig. God forbid you had in your home a television. Oh, there was so many. Today, smartphone is actually 10 times worse than television. Television had supervision. And it was, when I grew up in Israel, 2 channels. It was only black and white. Today, you can have 3D and you can see the worst thing you can imagine. As someone says, every meshugas, you can find millions of people that are having the same meshugas. And the smartphone is an absolute necessary, at least outside of Israel here, to live with. Banking, communication, everything is done by, how do you deal? And in Israel, there is a constant fight to control it. It's forbidden, don't allow. I was in the airport about 3 months ago. I went for 3 days and someone died. Lily Rosenberg died, so I had to come early. And that plane was delayed. It ended up, instead of leaving at 10 a.m., I ended up leaving at 10 p.m. We came home at 2 a.m. and there was a funeral. Anyway, I was at the airport coming in and out of the gate because I wanted to go out just to take a fresh air. I see there is a yeshiva boy with long coat and big payas, and he's pacing back and forth. And I see him after 20 minutes, he's pacing back and forth. So I came over to him, I said, can I help you? He said, yeah, I need a phone. I want somebody to call and pick me up. So I need a phone to call, a relative. So I said, here's my phone. You can have it. No. He says, I cannot touch, nothing to do with a smartphone. He says, no. Tut mi nicht kenteves. I walked away. But that's the way they are, restriction. What's the problem with restrictions? Why are you laughing?
Because I understand what happens.
Wow. Okay.
That's to help them boys, that kind of thing.
That's it. So what? Right. No, there is no such thing as kosher smartphone. There is kosher phone. My son Ari has a kosher phone. It's so simple. It may be texting, but nothing else. Anyway, we thought, by the way, with everything you do, all the filters you put, they overcome. Yeah. I have a child that showed me how they put everything, you can do anything. I just want to say the point, there was one point. So in Israel, the attitude, other than Chabad, is to restrict. Parents need a special permit to have a smartphone, and they cannot bring it home. They have to leave it in the workplace. So the children shouldn't be affected. What's the problem with that? The problem is obvious. When the child grows up and he's on his own, or he's going out of the home, they will do everything. And sometimes they do even worse. In Chabad, the Rebbe's attitude always was the nishma. Educate them how bad it is. Educate them what they are losing. Educate them the disconnect with God. So what happens is, when you educate them, you are, so to say, no guarantee. There is no guarantee. But overall, the success is far greater because they know they are mature enough to understand. So they're not doing behind the scene. They're not going to dark places with those devices. And this is a challenge still ongoing, a major challenge that nobody experienced before. The point is that no nishma naaseh without nishma will never work. And that's the Chabad way. But we start with a very young age, not when they are mature enough to know. So in other words, when they are very young children, we show them that we have it, but we shouldn't be abusing it. And God don't like when you abuse it. So it's a computer. So there is a hope. The numbers overall, no doubt that it works. Okay, so that's the idea. I think you're touching upon something bothered you that I assume, I may be wrong, but I think in the underneath is, why do you need nishma? God is our master, I'm his servant. Let's do what God said anyway at the end of the day. And as we know here, the nishma is what caused, the Rebbe is going to explain, what caused them to sin such a grave sin that affected generations to come? The nishma. Had they not had nishma, as somebody said, let's skip the nishma, the spies, then they wouldn't have no problem. But it is an absolute necessary to have your mindset involved with the performance of the mitzvah. Not only it adds to the mitzvah, but it makes the whole relationship a much healthier way. And now we're going to discover this. I'm reading again the last paragraph. Since the mission on which they were sent involved the dimension of nishma, that is, clarifying the matter in which the Jewish people would enter Eretz Israel according to human understanding, there was a possibility for them to err in their logic and reckoning. After all, says Rabbi, everything the spies said about Eretz Israel and its inhabitants are fierce, and we saw the descendants of the giants was true. In other words, the way they describe the Holy Land, people are dying there, there are giants there. They didn't exaggerate, they told the truth. Furthermore, even their conclusion, we cannot assent that it would be impossible to conquer Eretz Israel by natural means, can be logically understood. Says the Rebbe, the fact that they said it's impossible to conquer makes sense. Based on their findings, it's impossible. Thus, according to their perception, the spies had faithfully carried out the mission on which they were sent. We didn't ask them to fake it. We didn't ask them to change. We asked them to report exactly what they saw. They actually report what they saw. And based on their report, they can come to a simple conclusion that it's impossible to conquer. What then was their mistake? In addition to collecting information, they added a conclusion we cannot assent. That addition overstepped the scope of their mission. Moshe never asked them to determine whether it would be possible to conquer Eretz Israel. He sent them merely to find out the easiest way that Eretz Israel could be conquered. They added their conclusion. Nobody asked you to come to show the final. Just tell us what's the best way. Tell us the type of people, how to best conquer them from what area. To come with the conclusion that they saw in their eyes, which was correct, but they weren't asked for it. They had no right to say that.
Even before they went, they had a plotting to make sure that you stay in the desert and put a spin on it.
That's according to Medrash. You're mixing different interpretations. Here we read, Be'ota sha'a ksherim hayu. They were fully perfect at the time. It's impossible. Indeed, the very fact that Moshe sent them to spy out the land and clarify the manner in which it could be best be conquered was proof that it was possible to do so, even according to the rules of nature. For if the entry into Eretz Israel could only be accomplished by miracles above nature, there would have been no reason to send the spies. Thus, by making known the conclusion they reached, we cannot assent. Not only did the spies overstep their mission, they acted contrary to its goal. In other words, when Moshe sent them to learn how to conquer the land in the best way possible, he already infused them with the knowledge that it's possible. just find the easiest.
Mhm.
When they came with a conclusion, not only the conclusion was not, it was deviating from the mission, but also when they said it publicly, they are fighting, they go for against the very mission they were sent.
Mm.
The word, says the Rebbe, I'm sorry, the word Torah shares the same root letters of the word ora'ah, Torah, ora'ah, instruction. In other words, hence, it is understood that the Torah contains a lesson to safeguard us from making the mistakes that the spies made. What is it teaching us? According to Jewish custom, the name of the Torah reading is Shelach, a word which shares the same root letter as the word shlichut, mission. Shlach, mission, sent him. A Jew must know that even when he is involved in divine service according to the motives of Nishma, understanding things intellectually and acting according to his own discretion, he must always remember that he is acting as a shliach of Moshe. His motivation could not be that he desires to understand the matter at hand, but that it is God's will for him to do so. Says the Rebbe, the lesson is there has to be a lesson for us. That's what Torah means. What does it apply? It means when you are being sent into the world to serve God, to fulfill your mission, and it has to be done with nishma. You have to use common sense, understand, and make it pleasurable. Don't ever let loose of that bind, of that string, of that rope that's holding you, which is not as we must obey, even sometimes. In other words, my relationship with God is never based only on nishma and common sense. And that's what the Rebbe says. When a shliach takes such an approach, rest assured that he will carry out God's will, not only according to the motive of Naaseh, but also according to the motive of Nishma. He can be assured that his understanding will be genuine and he will arrive to the true conclusion. Knowledge, says the Rebbe, and understanding involve subjectively appreciating the true nature of the concept involved. This requires stepping beyond one's ordinary way of thinking. It is necessary to negate all one's natural tendencies and focus objectively on the matter that one desires to understand. When a person is involved in abstract thought, but remains motivated by his own pleasure and desire, it is possible for his thinking to be affected by his natural tendencies to the extent that he seeks to adapt reality to his own perception. Once you get involved and you do it because you understand it makes sense, makes you feel good, and you enjoy it, and it's so good, the mind is veering you slowly, just like the spies, they were kosher. But once they were so involved with Nishma, they failed. Says the Rebbe, this propensity leads to an expanded interpretation of the concept of bribery, concerning which the Torah says, a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and wraps the words of the righteous. And on the surface, this verse is difficult to comprehend, since the Torah of truth describes the subjects of the verse as wise and righteous. Certainly, these are true descriptions. If so, how could such a person possibly take a bribe? Says the Rebbe, it says that the bribe will blind the eyes of a wise and mess up, wrap around the righteous. When you call them righteous, you call them wise, meaning that they are perfect people. How is it possible that they accept bribe? How is it possible for the bribe to mess them up? However, the concept of the bribe includes not only taking money or something similar and telling a blatant lie because of the gift. That's a simple way of bribe. Give me the money and I'll rule in your favor. But also failing to think about the situation in an objective and honest way, and instead thinking about oneself and one's own feeling and learning and leaning. In other words, when I get a bribe from somebody, I start thinking, how will I look in the eye of that person? Is he still going to be my friend? Is he still going to be calling me and inviting me to his parties? When a person approaches a situation in such a manner, there is no way you can appreciate it as it truly is. That is, gain a genuine and objective appreciation to the concept at hand. And this, in other words, that's what happened to righteous and wise. if they take bribe, it's not that they take bribe to change the ruling. They take bribe and they try to do the right thing. But once they get busy, because their own benefit is at stake, they gain something. Now they put their own benefit and gain in the forefront, and that would lead them to do the wrong thing. And that's what the Spies did. They got involved in Nishma so much that now they became a ganze knackers. They come and says we can't. They are forfeiting the entire mission. This is the reason for the error of the Spies and the drastic decline they underwent. They lacked the bitul, the nullification to Moshe, to the degree that it would govern the functioning of the thought process. They were when they were involved in the motive of Nishma, exploring Eretz Israel with the intent of understanding the best and the most effective way of conquering it, since they felt and were controlled by their individual self-concern, seeing the Nephilim, the descendants of the giants, caused them to be overcome by terror. And to the extent that they said, we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes. This they fear, the fear they felt was the bribe which blinded their minds to the point that they declared, we cannot ascend. And the Rebbe says that you have to connect to Moshe, realizing that through Moshe, which totally nullified to God, that's when you can keep. So in other words, there has to be Naseh first. Then there has to be Nishma. But the Nishma alone, you have to realize you're a Shaliach of Moshe, be totally nullified, and don't forget the Naseh. Otherwise, it's like a bribery for the righteous and wise, it will blind them. And that's when that will bring the Mashiach Tzidkenu B'Karov, Speli nowadays. Thank you very much.
Every year they were told